Welcome, my dear guests, to the captivating expanses of my story. Chapter 4, 2202. Emma Hart stood on the bridge of the EK Asimov and gazed out at the stars. Her heart was pounding with excitement. She had done it. The breakthrough was finally achieved after months of hard work and countless sleepless nights. Captain, the sensors are showing unusual activity in Sector Alpha 7, reported Lieutenant Chen from the science station. Emma nodded. Exactly where I suspected it would be. She stepped closer to the main screen. The data streamed across the display, a swirl of numbers and diagrams, an incomprehensible mess to most, an open book to Emma. Scan the sector at full resolution, she ordered, focus on the gamma frequencies. The crew obeyed without hesitation. Emma had worked hard to earn their respect. I see it, shouted Chen excitedly. It's just as you predicted, Captain. The signature is clear. A low murmur went through the bridge. Emma suppressed a triumphant smile. Against all odds, she had been right. She instructed, transfer the data to the control center on Kasach. Mark it as a top priority. Emma knew that this discovery would change everything. Not only had she found a new life form, but she had also proven that her unconventional theories were correct. Congratulations, Captain, her first officer said quietly. This will go down in history. Emma nodded curtly. The work is just beginning. Prepare an away team. We're going down. The excitement in her voice was hard to miss. After all these years of research, she was about to make accurate contact. She turned to leave but then paused. Oh, and Dr. Novak? Please prepare a detailed report for the Imperatrix. She'll want to see it in person. Emma left the bridge with energetic steps. Her mind was already racing. There were so many questions and so many possibilities. She could hardly wait to share her discovery with the world. But first, she had to prepare herself. One wrong move could have catastrophic consequences, and Emma was all too aware of the responsibility that rested on her shoulders. As the door to her quarters closed behind her, she allowed herself a moment of weakness. Her whole body trembled. Pull yourself together, she muttered. You've trained for this. You're ready. With trembling hands, she activated her communication device. It was time to inform Kasach. The future began now. Emma Hart stood in her quarters on the EK Asimov, her eyes fixed on the large screen. Almar Kazan's familiar face filled the screen, his voice echoing through the room. Tonight, my fellow citizens, we have witnessed a historic moment for our beloved Empire of Kasach, Kazan announced, his eyes shining. Dr. Emma Hart, our brilliant chief scientist, has made a groundbreaking discovery. Emma felt her heart beat faster. The newsreader's words made the reality of her achievement sink in. Her intuition and scientific skill have brought us to the threshold of a new era, Kazan continued. The discovery of a previously unknown life form in Sector Alpha 7 will change our understanding of the universe forever. The screen switched to a live broadcast from the Imperial Senate. Imperatrix Sevia Heimber rose from her throne, her eyes shining with pride. On behalf of the Empire of Kasach, I express our deepest gratitude and highest appreciation to Dr. Emma Hart, the Imperatrix declared in a firm voice. Her achievement honors us all and shows what we as a people can accomplish when we bravely reach for the stars. Emma sank onto her bed, overwhelmed by the significance of the moment. Her communication device vibrated incessantly, a flood of congratulations flooding in. With trembling hands, she activated the hologram function. The image of the Imperatrix appeared before her, majestic and benevolent simultaneously. Your Majesty, Emma began, her voice trembling slightly. I am deeply honored by your words and your trust in me. Sevia smiled warmly. Emma, you have made us all proud. Your discovery will go down in the annals of our history. Emma swallowed hard, humility and gratitude overwhelming her. Without the Empire's support and my colleagues' trust, this would not have been possible, she replied softly. I stand on the shoulders of giants. Your modesty honors you, Sevia replied. But do not underestimate your contribution. Your intuition and courage have led us here. Emma nodded slowly. I promise to continue to use and develop my skills to advance our realm and unlock the universe's secrets. I trust you will, the Imperatrix said with an appreciative nod. Kost looks forward to your next steps. When the hologram went out, Emma dropped back onto her bed. The weight of her responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. But at the same time, she felt an irrepressible sense of anticipation for the adventures that lay ahead. Andrea Sauer stood on the bridge of the EK Ptolemy, her eyes fixed on the endless blackness of space before her. The ship glided silently through the vastness of the Eurasia system, each second bringing her closer to the edge and the imminent jump into the Igorot system. "Status report," Andrea demanded, her voice calm and controlled. Lieutenant Marcus Chen, the navigation officer, turned to her. "We're on course, Captain. ETA to the edge of the system, 47 minutes. Andrea nodded curtly. She could feel the tension in the crew, the electrifying mixture of nervousness and anticipation. For many, it was the first mission of its kind, a leap into the unknown. Engineer Tanya Rodriguez reported from her console, engines running at 92% efficiency. All systems are in the green zone. "Very good," Andrea replied. She let her gaze wander over the bridge, observing the concentrated faces of her crew. Everyone knew what was at stake. The EK Ptolemy not only carried the hopes and dreams of Kost but also the burden of responsibility. Dr. Elias Stern, the mission's chief scientist, stepped beside them. "Captain, the sensors are calibrated and ready to go. We're excited to see what awaits us in the Igorot system." Andrea smiled slightly. Stern's enthusiasm was infectious, even in this tense moment. "We all are, Doctor. But remember, caution is our top priority." "Of course, Captain," Stern nodded. "We won't rush into anything." Suddenly, a soft beeping sounded from the communications console. Lieutenant Zara Ahmed reported, "Incoming transmission from Kost, Captain. It's a personal message for you." Andrea raised an eyebrow. "Put it through to my quarters, Lieutenant. I'll listen to it later." She turned back to the main view screen, watching the stars go by. Every minute took her further away from home, deeper into the unknown. The responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders, but Andrea also felt proud of being part of something important. "Captain," Chen spoke up again. "We are approaching the edge. Jump preparations should be initiated now." Andrea nodded decisively. "Understood. All stations prepare for the jump. Secure all loose items and check your systems one last time." A flurry of activity engulfed the bridge as the crew made final preparations. Andrea felt her heart beat faster. The moment of truth was approaching. "Initiate jump sequence," she ordered, her voice firm and clear. "On my command." The seconds seemed to stretch endlessly. Andrea took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the main screen. The fate of the EK Ptolemy, her crew, and perhaps even the entire expedition was now in her hands. Myra Gupta entered the Imperial Senate, her footsteps echoing through the magnificent hall. As she walked to the lectern, she felt the senator's eyes on her. In her hand, she held a datapad on which the plans for EK Susquehanna flickered. "Honorable Senators," she began, her voice firm and clear. "The construction of the EK Susquehanna will lead our empire into a new era." She activated a holographic projection showing the massive construction cruiser. The ship rotated slowly in the air, its immense dimensions impressing even the most experienced senators. "This ship will double our capabilities for expansion and colonization," Myra continued. "It will create jobs, boost our industry, and secure our technological edge." A murmur went through the hall. Myra saw the enthusiasm flash in the eyes of many senators. But she also noticed the skeptical looks on the faces of some of the Helix representatives. She conceded that the cost would be considerable, but the long-term benefits far outweighed them. "We are investing in our future, in the strength and prosperity of Kazakhstan." She scrolled through the data on her pad. "Our calculations show a 7% increase in gross domestic product over the next 5 years. Unemployment will fall by 3%. Suddenly, Sister Nadine Heimer stood up, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "And what about the internal affairs of our empire? While we pump billions into space, our citizens suffer hardship." Myra paused, her eyes meeting Nadine's. She sensed the tension in the room, the underlying conflicts pushing their way to the surface. "Sister Nadine," Myra replied calmly. "The construction of the EK Susquehanna will also directly benefit our citizens, thousands of new jobs, investment in education and research, improved infrastructure. She turned to the entire Senate again. We are by no means neglecting our domestic affairs. On the contrary, this move will give us the resources and opportunities to care for our people even better. Nadine shook her head, her eyes flashing with anger. You talk about numbers and profits, Governor. But what about our values? Our culture? Our genetic purity? A murmur went through the hall. Myra felt the mood shift. She had to be careful, the situation was threatening to escalate. Our values and culture are the foundation on which we build, she replied. The ex-Susquehanna will not alienate us from our roots. It will help us protect and preserve them. She looked around, seeing the divided opinions on the faces of the senators. The decision on the future of Kasach was now in their hands. Andrea Sauer stood on the bridge of the Ek Ptolemy, her eyes fixed on the main screen on which the Igorot system was coming to life. The ship had just completed the hyperspace jump and was now gently gliding back into real space. Status report, Andrea demanded, her voice calm but tense. Lieutenant Chen, the navigation officer, turned to her. Jump completed, Captain. We are on the edge of the Igorot system. All systems are functioning normally. Andrea nodded appreciatively. Excellent. Start scanning the system. I want every detail recorded. Dr. Elias Stern, the chief scientist, stepped up next to her. His eyes lit up with excitement. Captain, the first data is coming in. It looks fascinating. A three-dimensional map of the system slowly unfolded on the main screen. In the center pulsated the red dwarf star Igorot, surrounded by 5 planets orbiting it in different orbits. Look at that, Stern murmured in awe. The third planet. It could be habitable. Andrea leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. Focus the scans on this planet. I want to know everything, the atmosphere, surface conditions, and possible signs of life. The spaceport of Xanadu shone with countless lights. The enormous docking bays were filled with ships from all parts of the Empire. Towering over everything was the Susquehanna, a colossal construction ship that dwarfed even the Belarus. Almar Kazan stood on a raised platform surrounded by cameras and microphones. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he looked into the nearest camera. My fellow citizens of Kazakhstan, he began, his voice complete and robust. Today is a historic day for our empire. The commissioning of the Susquehanna marks the beginning of a new era of expansion and progress. He waved his arm in the direction of the massive ship. This engineering masterpiece will work alongside the Belarus to expand and consolidate our presence in space. Suddenly, the crowd's murmur fell silent. Almar turned and saw Imperatrix Sevia Heimber approaching him. Her long, dark hair blew gently in the wind, and her eyes shone with pride and determination. Your Majesty, Almar greeted her with a deep bow. It is an honor to have you here. Would you say a few words about the significance of this day? Sevia nodded and stepped up to the microphone. Citizens of Kasach, her voice echoed across the square. The Susquehanna is more than just a ship. It symbolizes our unwavering will, our ability to overcome boundaries and open up new horizons. Almar watched as the crowd hung on her lips. Your Majesty, how will this new ship affect our strategy in space? Sevia smiled slightly. The Susquehanna will allow us to expand faster and more efficiently. It will establish research stations, develop resources, and extend our influence into previously unreached regions of space. And what do you say to the concerns of some senators that we are focusing too much on expansion and neglecting internal problems? Asked Almar, his journalistic curiosity piqued. Sevia's gaze turned serious. I assure you, Almar, that we never lose sight of the welfare of our people. The resources and opportunities open to us by the Susquehanna will go directly to improving the lives of all the citizens of Kasach. Almar nodded appreciatively. One last question, Your Majesty. What does this day mean to you personally? Sevia was silent for a moment, her gaze wandering over the gathered crowd and then up to the majestic silhouette of the Susquehanna. For me, she began quietly, this is a day of hope and pride. I see the Susquehanna as proof of the strength and ingenuity of our people. It reminds us that we can achieve great things together if we believe in our dreams and work hard for them. Almar felt goosebumps spread across his arms. He knew he had just witnessed a historic moment. Andrea Sauer stood on the bridge of the EK Ptolemy, her eyes fixed on the holographic screen before her. The Eagle-Rot system spread out in all its cosmic splendor, each planet a jewel in the blackness of space. But something was wrong. "Dr. Stern, take a look at this," she called out to her chief scientist. "This anomaly at Eagle-Rot 3, what do you make of it?" Dr. Elias Stern stepped closer, his eyes widening. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The energy signatures are like nothing we've seen before." Andrea nodded. "Lieutenant Chen, bring us in closer. Full sensor lock." The ship glided smoothly through space as the crew worked in tense silence. The anomaly grew on the screen, a swirling vortex of energy and matter. "Captain," announced Tanya Rodriguez from Engineering Control. "The anomaly is generating strong gravitational fluctuations. I recommend you keep your distance." Andrea bit her lip. She wanted to know more, but the safety of her crew came first. "Understood, Chief Engineer. Keep us at a safe distance." Dr. Stern leaned over his console, his fingers flying over the keys. "The data is incredible. It could be some space-time distortion. Possibly a natural wormhole?" Andrea's heart beat faster. A wormhole? The possibilities were endless. Mark the position and collect as much data as possible. This needs to be thoroughly investigated. The next few hours flew by. The crew of the EK Ptolemy worked feverishly to record every detail of the anomaly. Andrea felt the excitement, the electrifying tension of a great discovery. "Captain," Lieutenant Chen interrupted her thoughts. "We have an incoming transmission from Kasach. It's the Imperatrix." Andrea tightened. "Put it through." The holographic image of Imperatrix Sevia Heimber appeared on the bridge, majestic and imposing despite the light years separating them. "Commander Sauer," the Imperatrix began, her voice full of pride. "We have received your report on the anomaly. Once again, you and your crew prove that the Empire of Kasach can do great things." Andrea bowed slightly. "Thank you, Your Majesty. We are only beginning our investigations, but the possibilities are promising." Sevia nodded gravely. "Continue with your work, Commander. But be careful. We don't know what dangers could be lurking there." "Understood, Your Majesty. We will proceed with caution." As the transmission ended, Andrea turned back to her crew. She saw the same mixture of excitement and determination in their eyes that she felt. "Very well, ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice firm and clear. "Let's find out what else this universe has in store for us." The Imperial Senate Hall echoed with the babble of excited senators. The massive domed building, an architectural masterpiece of steel and glass, shimmered in the light of the red giant orbiting Kasach. The walls were emblazoned with the banners of the various factions, their colors a colorful contrast to the room's sterile atmosphere. Myra Gupta stood at the podium, her petite figure almost lost in the vast hall. But her voice carried clearly as she presented the plans for the outpost in the CITES system. "Dear colleagues," she began, "the EK Belarus is ready to expand our borders. With this outpost, we are securing valuable resources and demonstrating our technological superiority." A murmur went through the ranks. Senator Voss, a beefy man with thinning hair, jumped. "At last! It's time we took our rightful place in the universe." Murmurs of approval filled the hall. But a gaunt figure in the simple robes of the Helix rose from the back rows. Sister Nadine Heimber strolled to the hall center, her eyes glittering with barely suppressed anger. "Have we learned nothing from our history?" Her voice cut through the commotion like a knife. "Every expansion brings dangers to our genetic purity. We are risking everything our ancestors fought for." The mood in the chamber shifted. Senators jumped to their feet, shouting at each other. Myra raised her hands placatingly. "Please, my colleagues. Let us remain rational. The EK Belarus will adhere to the strictest quarantine protocols. Our genetic integrity is not in question." But Nadine didn't let up. "Protocols? Paper and empty words. We're opening Pandora's box." The debate raged for hours. Arguments flew back and forth like projectiles in a cosmic battle. Proponents extolled the economic and scientific possibilities, while the Helix faction painted gloomy prophecies of genetic contamination and the downfall of their civilization on the wall. Finally, Imperatrix Sevia Heimber rose from her elevated throne. The hall immediately fell silent. Her presence alone was enough to calm even the most heated of tempers. Senators, her voice was soft but steely. I have heard your arguments. Our expansion is inevitable, but we will approach it with caution. The EK Belarus will establish the outpost under the strictest supervision and with every conceivable security measure. She turned directly to Nadine. Sister, your concerns are not unfounded. That is why a representative of the Helix will accompany and supervise the mission. Nadine bowed stiffly, her expression impenetrable. As you wish, Imperatrix. With those words, the decision was made. The Senate dissolved, and the senators streamed out of the hall, some cheering, others grimly. But everyone knew that a new era had begun for the Empire of Kasach. The Imperial Senate of Kost resented the confusion of the votes and the grinding of magnificent clothes. Sunlight fell through the high dome windows and plunged the marble floor into a golden glow. Empress Sevia Heimber exalted herself over the assembly, looking vigilantly at the debating senators. Dear colleagues, Myra Gupta called into the room. Today, we are deciding nothing less than the future of our empire. A ruin went through the ranks. Myra raised her hands reassuringly. The infinite possibilities agenda will reach every corner of Kost, from the tundras in the north to the coastal towns in the south. No citizen will be left behind. Senator Voss jumped up. And who will pay for it? We can't. Enough. Sevia's voice cut through the tumult like a knife. We invest in our people because it is our most precious resource. Silence lay over the hall. Sevia stood up, her eyes sparkled. Imagine schools that awaken the potential of every individual, universities that carry out groundbreaking research, and training centers that make our workers masters of their profession. She walked down the stairs, electrifying her words. We are not just creating education, we are opening horizons. Every Kazakh should have the chance to realize his dreams. Whether as scientists, artists, or astronauts, the stars are our limit. An enthusiastic murmur filled the hall. But from the rear rows, Sister Nadine stood up seriously. Imperatrix, consider the risks. Too much knowledge could jeopardize our traditions. Sevia smiled gently. Sister, education does not threaten our culture, it enriches it. Let us unite knowledge and faith, not separate them. She turned to the assembly again. This agenda is more than an educational plan. It is a promise to our people. We give them the tools to grow, research, and dream. Her voice became quieter, more persuasive. Imagine what we can accomplish if every Kasach unfolds its full potential. What miracles we are creating, what secrets we will uncover. A rush went through the assembly. Senator Voss nodded slowly, reluctantly acknowledging his gaze. Sevia raised her voice for the last time. Let's write history today, for Kasach, for our people, for a future full of endless possibilities. A lot of applause broke out. The senators stood up, the air was filled with shouts of joy. Sevia looked over the crowd, pride and determination in her eyes. A new chapter for Kasach began. After the applause for the infinite possibilities agenda was shaken, Myra Gupta rose again. She wandered, and the grinding of her colorful garment passed through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, Imperatrix, we have another item on the agenda. Sevia bowed to her as she sat back on her throne. The senators remained silent, looking at Myra. Our empire is growing and thriving. New worlds, new challenges. It is time for this to be reflected in our Senate. Senator Voss shrugged his forehead. What exactly is the matter with you, Governor? Myra smiled. An extension of the Senate by an additional seat. A ruin went through the ranks. Some senators chanted enthusiastically with each other, others seemed skeptical. Nadine Heimber stood up, her skinny shape rang out above the others. And who is to take this seat? More secular interests that water our traditions? Sevia bowed, her eyes flashed. Sister Nadine, let us not judge in a hurry. Myra, explain your thoughts to us. Myra nodded thankfully. The new seat is supposed to be a voice for those in the shadow. Think of the colonists on Loki, the researchers in the Sidus system. They contribute to the good of the Empire, but we often lack their perspective. Senator Voss snorted. And how is it supposed to work? We can't get every mine worker to the Senate. Of course not, replied Myra quietly. But we could elect a representative, someone who represents the interests of our outposts and colonies. Sevia nodded slowly, thoughtfully. This is an interesting idea. It would help us better understand the needs of all our citizens. Nadine shook her head. Imperatrix, consider the risks. Such a representative could bring in ideas foreign to our culture. Or he could show us what we have overlooked, Sevia gently replied. Sister, change doesn't have to be a threat. It can also be an opportunity. The debate was back and forth. Senators passionately argued for and against enlargement. Myra stood quietly in the middle, answering questions and explaining details. Eventually, Sevia stood up. The hall silenced instantly. I have heard your arguments, my faithful advisors. And I have made a decision. She let her gaze swing over the assembly. The Senate will be expanded by 1 seat. Some cheered, others murmured dissatisfied. But no one dared to contradict the Empress. Myra, continued Sevia, you will work out the details, how this new representative will be elected, what powers it will have, and work closely with all groups. Myra bowed deep. It will be an honor to me, Imperatrix. Sevia addressed the entire Senate. This is a historic moment, my friends. We adapt, we grow, just as our empire does. The EK Belarus floated majestically in Sidus II's orbit, its kilometer-long silhouette darkened part of the planet's surface. Captain Olga Petrov stood on the command bridge and looked down on the blue planet. Her face was reflected in the armored disk. How are you, Chief Engineer? She asked over her shoulder. Yelena Voronin bowed over her console, and sweating beads glittered on her forehead. The basic structure of the outpost has been completed at 15%, Captain. We are on schedule. Olga nodded, satisfied. Good. The sooner we finish here, the better. The sum of the engines vibrated through the ship as EK Belarus adjusted its position. Outside in space, dozens of working drones and construction robots floated around the semi-finished structure of the outer post. Laser welders flashed on, and metal plates were put in position. Captain, we have an incoming transmission from Kasach, Communications Officer Pavel Sokolov said. On the screen. The face of Imperatrix Sevia Heimber appeared on the main screen. Even as a hologram, it radiated authority. Captain Petrov, how's the construction going? Olga unwillingly punished herself. As planned, Your Majesty. In 6 months, the outpost will be operational. Sevia nodded with appreciation. Excellent. This post will be crucial to our expansion. But be careful, we don't know what lies in the depths of the universe. I understand, Imperatrix. We will remain vigilant. When the connection ended, Olga turned to her crew. You heard it, guys. Let's finish this outpost and make Kasach proud. The next few weeks passed like a flight. Day and night, the crews of EK Belarus worked on the construction of the outpost. Layer by layer, the structure grew, becoming more complex and powerful. But space was a ruthless workplace. Micrometeorite damaged sensitive devices, and cosmic radiation inflicted damage on the workers. Olga pushed her men but was pessimistic about their safety. Damn it! Yelena cursed one day. Gravity generators in Sector 7 have failed. We need to recalibrate the entire range. Olga suppressed a sigh. How long will it take? At least 3 days, if we're lucky. Then we'd better start right away. Call the tech team together. As the work continued, Olga's thoughts revolved around the words of the Empress. What did you like to hide out there? She shook her head. Now wasn't the time for such shit. They had an assignment to fulfill, to set up an outpost. The Empire counted on them. The dawn fell over the endless mooring landscapes of Sidus II. A dense fog crawled out of the peat soil, covering the harsh vegetation in a ghostly veil. The last rays of the red dwarf star plunged the world into an unreal twist. The thin turtles contained life. Strange, 6-legged amphibians crawled out of the dull water, their bald skin shimmering in the shiny light. They cast out deep, gurgling sounds, a strange choir that broke the silence of the night. Over the swamps danced swords of bright insects. Their bioluminescent bodies pulsated in hypnotic patterns as if they were sending a secret message into the darkness. They formed spiraling formations, dissolved, and found themselves together again, a living ballet in the night sky. In the distance arose the dark outline of a half-sinking ruin. Thunderstorm stone columns ripped out of the marsh, silent witnesses of a long-past civilization. The broken walls were surrounded by tough ranch plants, and their glowing flowers slowly opened in the dark. A light wind swept the plain, carrying the bluish smell of devastating vegetation. He made the thorn bushes tremble, stretching out of the ground like crooked fingers. Her leather-like leaves whistled quietly, a whispering hardly heard in the night. From the depths of a nearby swamp, a bubble of poisonous gas rose up, making a dull noise on the surface. The biting stink chased out a group of small, furry creatures who had been looking for food on the shore. They coughed on their many legs and disappeared into the underwood. A new spot glittered in the sky between the strange constellations. Bright and steady, unlike the sparkling stars around it, it was EK Belarus orbiting the planet, unnoticed by the fauna beneath it. A reptile-like creature, the size of a bear, stumbled through the moor. Its wide prances distributed the weight on the unstable surface. It stopped, lifted its massive skull, and snapped into the night air. His eyes, large and blind, reflected the weak light like opals. Strange mushroom-like formations grew in a dried riverbed. Their fleshly stems pulsated rhythmically, pumping glowing spores into the air. The tiny particles floated like light bulbs through the night, carrying the organism's genetic material. A bunch of flea-like creatures came out of a cave, their leathered wings cutting silently through the air. They chased the glowing insects, their needle-spiked teeth grabbed. Some of the prey animals fell to the ground, where they were immediately swallowed up by crawling deer-eaters. The night on Citus Tuat pulsated with life, an ecosystem in perfect balance. Untouched by the presence of humans floating high above them, nature followed its ancient rhythm. The new star in the sky went unnoticed, meaningless to the creatures who have inhabited this world for eons. The Imperial Senate of Kost was filled with excitement. Emma Hart stood at the speaker's desk, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. She had been working on this moment for months. "Dear Senators," she began, with her voice firm and clear. "The discoveries of recent months have shown us how much we still don't know. It is time for us to step up our scientific efforts." A ruin went through the ranks. Senator Voss refused to put his forehead in folds. "And how exactly do you imagine that, Minister Hart?" Emma smiled. She activated a holoprojection that filled the hall with floating charts and statistics. "I propose the establishment of a scientific department. A fleet unit dedicated exclusively to research and medical care." Nadine Heimber stood up, her eyebrows seriously. "Research is important, but we must not neglect our traditions." "On the contrary, Sister Nadine," replied Emma. "This department will continue and strengthen our discovery tradition." Empress Sevia bowed herself, arousing her interest. "Explain the details, Minister Hart." Emma nodded thankfully. "We will increase the number of our scientific and medical officers. New training programs will accelerate training. Our research options will be expanded while saving costs." The senators whispered excitedly. Some nicked in agreement, others seemed skeptical. Myra Gupta took the floor. "And what about the practical impact?" "Excellent question," said Emma. "Our research capacity will increase by 10%, and the cost of scientific titles will decrease in the same way. That means faster discoveries, better medical care, and all with less expenditure." A rush went through the assembly. Even the most skeptical senators could not deny the benefits. Sevia stood up, her presence filled the room. "I heard and understood. The establishment of the scientific department is at this moment approved." Applause burst. Emma shone, and her vision became a reality. "Minister Hart," continued Sevia, "you will monitor the implementation personally. I look forward to regular progress reports." Emma bowed deep. "It will be an honor to me, Imperatrix." When the sitting ended, the senators flocked out of the chamber, and the air vibrated with expectation. A new era of discoveries and progress began for the Kingdom of Kasach. The great temple of the Helix shone in the light of countless candles. Hundreds of believers pressed into the vast dome building, their eyes directed at the central platform. Stood Nadine Heimber, Saint General of the Helix, her skinny shape wrapped in simple, white coats. Nadine breathed deeply. The events of the last few months were a heavy burden on her. The foundation of the scientific department, the discoveries in space, Everything seemed to threaten the traditions that she so desperately sought to preserve. "Brothers and sisters," she began, her voice heard throughout the room. "We live in a time of change. But don't be fooled, our traditions are the anchor in this storm of change." An agreed murmur passed through the crowd. Nadine felt her doubts slowly fading away. "The discoveries in space may be impressive, but they only confirm what we always knew: we are the crown of creation, chosen to explore the universe." She raised her hands, and her eyes shone with conviction. "Our genetic purity is the key to our progress. Preserving it is not just tradition, it is our sacred duty." The believers nicked, and many knocked on the chest in agreement. Nadine felt a new force flowing through her. "The scientific department may embark on new paths, but we will be vigilant. We will ensure that every discovery and progress is in accordance with our sacred laws." She lowered her voice, forcing the crowd to listen. "Remember the prophecy, a genetically perfect Messiah will lead us into a new age. Per our research, will we prepare the way for his arrival?" A ruin went through the temple. Nadine saw hope and reverence in the faces of the believers. She felt her faith consolidating, her doubts dissolving. "Let's pray," she cried, lowering her head. The crowd followed their example. "May the purity of our genes guide us. May it make us strong in times of change. And may it make us worthy to decipher the universe's secrets." When the prayer was finished, many voices sang. Nadine looked over the crowd, her heart filled with new courage. She had found comfort, not only for herself but for all believers. The assembly slowly dissolved, but Nadine's words remained. The helix had bound its believers to tradition while showing a way into the future. For Nadine, it was more than a sermon, it was a confirmation of her faith, a renewal of her mission. Almar Kazan sat in the brightly illuminated studio of KNN, the camera firmly pointed at him. His distinctive facial features seemed serious when he looked into the lens. The screen flashed behind him, ready for the presentation. "My dear fellow citizens of the Kingdom of Kasach," he began, his voice full and clear. "The year 2202 is ending, full of breakthrough discoveries and bold steps into the future." He activated the screen. An impressive picture of the EK Asimov appeared as it glided majestically through space. The EK Ptolemy's Virgin journey marked the beginning of a new era of exploration. Commander Andrea Sauer and her crew gave us insights into worlds we could only dream of. The image changed to a photograph of Sidus II, his blue-green surface surrounded by clouds. The discovery of extraterrestrial life on Sidus II has fundamentally changed our understanding of the universe. We are no longer alone, my friends. Almar leaned, his eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. But not enough. The Imperial Senate has made courageous decisions to lead our empire to a glorious future. A hologram of the newly formed Scientific Corps appeared. The establishment of the scientific department promises to revolutionize our research capabilities. We are on the brink of breakthroughs that could surpass our boldest dreams. The screen showed an impressive picture of the outside post in the Sidus system being built. The enormous structure floated in orbit, surrounded by a bunch of working drones and the imposing silhouette of EK Belarus. And here, my dear spectators, we see the tangible evidence of our expansion. The outpost in the Sidus system, built by the tireless crew of EK Belarus, will secure our presence in this promising system. Almar stood up and went closer to the camera, his gesture underlining the meaning of his words. These achievements, these steps into the unknown, define us as a people. They show what we can do when we overcome our fears and move forward courageously. He paused for a moment and made his words work. But with great progress comes great responsibilities. This year's discoveries have raised questions about our place in the universe and the nature of our existence. It is up to all of us to answer these questions with wisdom and discretion. Almar returned to his seat, staring firmly at the camera. As we look into the new year, let us celebrate the achievements of 2202. But let us also pause and think about how we can use these new opportunities for the benefit of all. Because only together, united in our quest for knowledge and progress, will we meet future challenges? Paulina Romero stood upright on the bridge of the lead corvette Pegasus Prime, her eyes fixed on the approaching force field of the starport. The lights of Xanadu glittered through the atmosphere of Kasach, a welcome sight after months in space. "Bring the fleet to an anchor position," she commanded, her voice calm and determined. The bridge crawler worked precisely, her fingers dancing over the controls. The Pegasus fleet gently slipped through the shimmering power field, the sum of the engines gradually silenced. Paulina watched the anchor clamps close around the ships on the main screen. When the Pegasus Prime was securely fixed, a slight trembling passed through the trunk. "Andock maneuvers completed, Admiral," said the first officer. Paulina nodded with appreciation. "Good work. Start with the unloading logs and inform the crew of the forthcoming land holiday." There was a smile on her otherwise serious face. She knew how much her people needed this break. Paulina left the bridge and set out for the main hangar. She felt the crew's excitement all over the corridors. Talks about holiday plans and long-awaited family meetings filled the air. The hangar was already busy. Maintenance teams swung out and started making the necessary repairs and upgrades. The smell of lubricant oil and hot metal filled the air. Chief Engineer Jan Wolfile rushed to Paulina, a datapad in hand. "Admiral, I have the preliminary maintenance plans for you. We will make the most of the time." Paulina overflew the data. "Excellent, January. Concentrate especially on the shield generators and weapon systems. I want the fleet in top shape when we run out again." Jan said goodbye. "Okay, ma'am. We will work round the clock." Paulina laid her hand on Elena's shoulder. Make sure that your people also get some rest. You deserve it." The chief engineer nodded gratefully and went to work. Paulina watched the first crew members leave the hangar with pockets and cheerful faces. She felt a rush of pride. These men and women had done extraordinary things. Slowly, she walked through the hangar and inspected the corvettes. Despite the hardships of the last few months, the bodies glowed in the light of the hanging lanterns. The Pegasus fleet was more than just a collection of ships, it was the backbone of Kasach's defense. Paulina stood in front of the Sturmfalk, gently stitching over the cool metal shell. These ships were their responsibility, their burden, but also her greatest pride. Hey, I would be happy if you could give my video a like, leave a comment and subscribe to my channel to stay up to date.